I'm Shivani Gupta. I'm obsessed with small to medium businesses growing. As business owners, we take so much risk and we want to make sure it's worth it. I believe one of the best presents you can give yourself as a business owner is to be able to learn how to scale your people, your profit, and your processes. Welcome to Grow Your Business podcast. I'm Shivani Gupta, your host. As we have now drawn to the end of the financial year, I just wanted to draw your attention as a founder and as a business leader. It is so important that we get the end of financial year and have a bit of a checklist in terms of all the things that you need to be able to do. I was not very good at this, and I also just want to put a disclaimer in that I'm not an accountant or financial expert. These are just some of my lessons and learnings as an entrepreneur, having run my own businesses for over 20 years. And I come across so many people, particularly in the last month, where I'm speaking to people, in particular women, who have not paid themselves in the last financial year as entrepreneurs, yet are growing an amazing business. I spoke to somebody the other day that's got a $350K business and has not paid herself more than $20,000 in the last year. So it's so important to be able to pay yourself first. I speak about that a lot for people that have got more smaller businesses, but some of my audience have got larger businesses. So here are some of the steps. And if you're very far removed from that, also just make sure that somebody in your business is going through this particular checklist. So the first thing is just making sure that all of your accounts are reconciled. Before you do anything else, just making sure that all your bookkeeping, whether you internally do that, whether you externally outsource that, all your bookkeeping records are in check, making sure that all your accounts payable, your accounts receivable are up to date and are reconciled. And it's so important to be able to regularly do that. I used to do this a couple of times a year, and with some very good guidance around me, I was asked to kind of do that more on a monthly basis, just to see where everything was and making sure that it looks right. And a lot of small business owners try and do all of this myself. This is not one of my strengths. And for a lot of founders, it's not their strength. So just making sure you've got right people around you, again, whether it's internally or externally, to be able to do it. The second thing is you need to also learn how to review financial reports. Again, this was not something I was brilliant at when I started, and I'm still not brilliant at it, but just getting better at just being able to look at the data. And, data is data. It's when you're able to read that and take actions from it, that's when it becomes wisdom. So you want to be able to have your financial reports set out in a way that makes sense to you, that you can look through them again very, very quickly. And more importantly, you can take that data and that wisdom in terms of how to read that and make better, drive better business decisions now and also into the next 12 months as well. I like looking at my reports really simply. I like making sure the templates make sense to me, and I have that tailored up in terms of being able to do that. You also want to be able to look at analysing your cash flow. The cash flow is really, really important. And I know that when I've been in startup in that first 2 or 3 years of any business, the cash is the one that either makes or breaks you. I've had one of my businesses that was going really well from a revenue perspective, but I ran out of cash. This was about almost 10 years ago now. And there were some very hard, expensive lessons to be learned from that particular exercise. So making sure that you're looking at your cash flow, you're not just looking at your revenue, making sure that you've also got some cash flow forecasting for the next 12 months and how you're planning on doing some of your strategic planning around some of the cash flow as well, and ensuring that that works. The other thing, a lot of people start off with that, but it's so important whether you do that at the beginning or that's the first thing that you do, but just reflecting on how your business went in the last 12 months, what worked, what didn't work, and then also reviewing the goals that you'd set out 12 months ago. And really, did you stay on track? And asking questions like, were you successful? Were you over successful? Were you under successful? Did you beat the mark? And rather than just go, great, we beat our budget, actually analysing that a little bit and asking the questions, why is it that you beat the record by so much? It's just as equally important to understand why you did so well as why something didn't meet the target. And sometimes we only do it when it didn't meet the target rather than that, because there could be some really fantastic strategies and some juice, as I call it, when you look at what overshot the mark, because then you want to maybe rinse and repeat that into this financial year as well. And if things didn't work and things completely went left field, well, why? Maybe there was a project you launched and it didn't work. And what were perhaps the lessons out of that in terms of what you're doing? And then you want to use that to be able to set your next 12-month goals. So, for example, a project that didn't work, you either might want to tweak that, or you might say, look, that project is done, but we want to launch a couple of other things and look at how that might work. The next strategy and next area in your checklist is probably also to look at some of the shortcomings and solutions. So really diving deep into some of the things, if we can call them failures, or as I like to call them, learnings. What happened? Did we not have the right people on the project? Was there not enough time and energy dedicated to that particular project? Whatever the reasons are, brainstorming that with your team and really looking at, so we don't continue to again make those same mistakes on this project or other projects in the future. Also looking at your end of year incentives. So what incentives are you giving yourself? Are there any incentives or bonuses that you're going to be giving some of your team? And a lot of people talk about, well, if we have a great year, I'm going to give them financial incentives. But my big area that I speak a lot about is making sure that the incentives are linked into people's passions. Rather than giving everybody the same thing, if you've got that ability, looking at what people are passionate about and giving them that. For example, I have a leader that we used to work in my business whose number one passion was health and body and fitness. And so rather than give her a financial bonus in dollar terms, which didn't mean a lot to her, it was about paying for her gym membership, which was about $1,500 a year. And she just loved the fact that that was already paid for her for the next 12 months, because it was something that she was, really passionate about. I also had a great leader that normally in that particular role, we had never done a permanent part-time role, but she was so brilliant that I adjusted that role to 4 days a week rather than a full-time 5 days a week role. And that was more important to her than getting a financial reward. So understanding what some of your key leaders want as a founder and a leader in your business, and seeing where you can tailor them. You can't always, depending on the size of your business, but if you can tailor that, it makes an incredible difference in terms of what you do. And now when you're setting your goals for next year, make sure that they fit into your broader strategy. Make sure that they always fit into your broader why, and then write them down. There's a lot of power in terms of writing them down. And as a founder, I always like writing my goals down first, and then I want my team to be able to strategize them. And then I want to be able to go around and share them and pick the top goals that we're going to focus on for the next 12 months, and then break them into quarterly amounts. So what are the quarterly, by the end of that next quarter, what is the big thing that you're going to be able to do? The next one is super simple, and I'm sure that a lot of this audience already does it, but I do come across some startups and even some businesses that have been going for less than 5 years that don't still even have a clearly defined budget. Making sure that you've actually got a budget, make sure you try and stick to it. That's the harder part, because what that does, it allows for you to take into account all the different things that you're spending money on, and to be able to do that. And one of the key things really important when you're doing your end of year and starting to look at the next 12 months is really looking at and evaluating your leadership in your team. So what does that mean? Well, how well did my team go? How well did they communicate? How did they manage their time across certain big projects and tasks that were set for them? What's the workplace culture like? Is there employee recognition that we're doing? Are we financially savvy? Is my leadership team financially savvy? Do they get why we're making certain decisions around certain areas? What's their business acumen like? What's the industry knowledge like? Actually having a bit of a deep dive into my leadership team and ensuring that they understand. And it could be a gap in education that you then need to fulfill by some training that they might be able to get, whether that's you or somebody else in your business or somebody externally that they might need to be able to do that. So how can I get my leadership team to a level where they are in alignment in terms of, and their leadership steps up another level in the next 12 months to be able to meet our business goals? And also, how are we going to celebrate successes? So even if we weren't successful across the whole board, how could we actually become more successful so that we can start to make more of a difference in celebrating those wins and having that culture and that workplace culture to be able to celebrate those wins, and then also work out how we might celebrate certain milestones in the next 12 months. So what are you most proud of? If somebody said, what's one thing or three things that you're most proud of, what would you tell them at a barbecue or when you're catching up with people? So here's just a little bit of a list in terms of what I use most years, and my top 10 tips in terms of being able to do that. As I said, for some people, they already do some of this really well. The ones that I've really incorporated into my list in the last 3 years is really looking at my leadership team, looking at how they can step up, and what are some of the things that I need to be able to do that to step up. Love the fact that you tune in. Thank you so much for listening, and would always really appreciate if you could take a moment and review this podcast on Apple for Undergrow Your Business. And I hope that you've had a fantastic last 12 months, and I hope that as you strategize for the next 12 months, you get to really get clear in terms of how you're going to be even more successful than you have been. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Shivani Gupta, and you've been listening to the Grow Your Business podcast. I hope you got one idea that you can think about or perhaps even implement straight away in your business. Thank you for listening. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn under Ask Shivani. Remember, I call it Ask Shivani, so please send me your questions that I can address in this podcast for you. And I would also so appreciate if you went to the Apple Podcast to rate and review this podcast.